So I'm paddling the Columbia River from source to mouth, and I just decided to paddle the river simply because I wanted to see where the river went when it's out of sight. Most of us see the Columbia River somewhere when you're crossing a bridge or you're doing a little fishing from one of the access points, or when you're driving along I-84 in Oregon or something. But you know, there's so much of that river, 1,200 miles of it, and there's so much we don't know, and I wanted to know more about it. So about 400 miles into the paddle, still in Canada, I start to paddle under Castlegar, the city of Castlegar area, underneath, Hugh Kinleyside Dam. And from that point on, it's a free-flowing river, past the Kootenay River and down to the border, U.S.-Canadian border, and then a little bit past the border, maybe 15 miles. And as I put in near Castlegar, I realized that this river is where I've been paddling on the Arrow Lakes, which is a big, massive, dammed up area. Once you put into the Columbia when it's below Castlegar, it's a big, wild river. And when you're in a kayak, you get thrown around a lot by whirlpools and eddies and all kinds of bubbling and roiling that goes on in the river. And you know, I thought about not going down towards trail because it's in a real deep canyon. There's no access points until you get to trail. But I went ahead anyway. I was kind of talked into it. Joyce wanted to get this section done. She's not paddling with me, but she just didn't want to come back up here and do it again. So I put in by myself, and I go on down, and I noticed there was some pretty big whirlpools at various points where the river, the bank sticks out into the river. And so I pull out at Gyro Park in Trail because the day before I had been warned to check out the Two Rock Island area just down below Trail, about 3 miles. And these were kayakers who warned me about this. And they said, you know, this is big water, high water period of time. They said, don't go in there. And I thought, well, God, I'd like to get this done. But at any rate, I pulled out at Gyro Park, and Joyce and I drove down and checked it out. And sure enough, right behind the first big rock island is this massive whirlpool. And this whirlpool is so big that there isn't a chance that you don't get drawn into it if you're trying to get down this river. And literally there's a vortex that sweeps down below and then hits another island just below the big island. And there's just no way to get out of it. So I decide, yeah, I'm going to skip this 9-mile section and just go down below the border because I'll come back and get it in low water. And the kayaker said, yeah, you got to get it in you know, when the dam's not releasing a lot up above, and you know, you have an opportunity to get between the big eddy and the big whirlpool and just skirt through. So I went down to the border, and I had some trouble getting through the border as usual. They suspect I'm going to kayak through the border with my sea kayak, which is insane. But they always pull me out of my car and warn me about paddling through. But at any rate, they tell me you have to go down 2 miles and put in again. So that's what I did, and I really didn't do much research about that lower portion just below the border. But the water's still big, and now you have the Pend Oreille River kicking in right at the border. And so when I put in, it was around 110,000 cubic feet per second. And this is a roiling, boiling big water with rapids in certain areas, not big rapids, but the main thing are the whirlpools. And I didn't have much trouble until I stopped at this dock a couple miles down, and this lady who lives there said, how far are you going to paddle? And I said, well, I'm going to paddle all the way to the Pacific. And she says, well, beware of Little Dalles. And I thought Little Dalles. I thought she was talking about Dalles, Oregon. I thought that's kind of an odd thing to say. And I said, well, what's so bad about the Dalles? She said, well, Little Dalles is a constriction of the river just down below Northport. And it wasn't too far from where we were. And she says right after the constriction, when it opens out, there's a lot of massive whirlpools in there, and they give motorboats trouble, they give everybody trouble. And I thought, well, boy, I hadn't heard this before, even though I'm paddling this entire river. And so as I got to Northport, I pulled out, and Joyce and I drove down the road to where I could see Little Dalles. It's really difficult to see from a distance, and you can't approach it. It's on private land. So about a quarter mile, half mile off, we're looking down at Little Dalles, and sure enough, there's 3 big whirlpools before you get into the constriction point. It's only like 300 feet wide at that point, and that's a lot of water going through rock walls, and when it empties out, it creates a lot of hydraulics. And at the bottom, I could see some whirlpools as it comes out, but I thought, well, I'll skip them. I'll just skirt to the left and I'll be okay. So I put in, it's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's late. The sun's going down. The sun's in my eyes. I'm not feeling really comfortable about this section of river, even though I've paddled 450 miles now. And so there's a lot of sounds coming off the river that make you kind of edgy, kind of uptight, at least it did for me. And so, but I skirted around these big boulders that were sticking out, and I get down into the constricted area, and I enter it perfect. There's no question. I skipped the whirlpools at the head of the constriction area, and I got onto the left side, and I'm roaring along the left-hand wall, and it's just a dead vertical wall, and it's there's no way to get out of there once you're in there. You're trapped. And so I'm probably going about 7 to 8 miles per hour, and there's nothing that's throwing the boat around, so I'm feeling pretty good. I'm thinking, God. And as I get to the exit area of this constriction, and it goes into a bay, and it's into a big rock walled bay, I'm thinking, well, God, that was easy. And just as I thought that, this whirlpool suddenly just appears in front of my bow, and it takes my bow to the left, and then suddenly my stern goes into it, and it pokes me straight up 90 degrees and then sucks me down like the Titanic. And I thought, this is not happening. But it was, and I'm down in this hole with this green water bubbling, and there's no way you can get out of this bubbling water. It just sucks you down as far as it can. And I don't know how far it was, and all I know, it kind of started to turn dark, and it's freezing water in the Columbia, and I wasn't dressed for that. But it spun me around for a while I was in there. But whirlpools dissipate as they go down river. So this thing that had sucked me down started to release me, and I popped up, and I had my paddle under the boat, and my boat was upside down, but I just grabbed it and held on, because even though it let me rise up, it was still spinning the boat and myself slowly around as it crossed the river and then dumped me into this other wall, which I was also worried about, because how you can get sucked down next to these rock walls with that kind of water and held down. But it didn't hold me down. It eddied me upriver along this rock wall. I tried to kind of grab it, and luckily I didn't. It eddied me back out into the river, and then I went down for another 3/4 of a mile, kind of slowly spinning around, and finally I managed to get on top of the boat, the bottom of the boat, and paddle to the shore, because no matter what I did when I was in the water, I could not swim and pull that boat anywhere, because it was so loaded with water. The river had me, and it wasn't going to release me. It was late at that point. It was like, closing in at dark. And so I quickly pumped the boat out and tried to dry my clothes out a little bit, because I was hypothermic. And I jumped in the boat. I had 6 miles to go, and paddled as fast as I could down to what's called China Bend. And in the dark, I could see my wife waiting at the boat ramp, only because she had her headlights turned upriver. And so I headed for those headlights. And so we took the next day off rather than keep paddling the next day. I needed a break, even though it was going to be all dead water from there.